All right, welcome back to Tremendous Views. Here we got week 2, episode 2, whatever you want to call it, of the music collection connection. Yeah, I think that's right. And all right, we are picking up from where we left off. If you haven't seen episode 1, just a brief overview of the rules. We pick an album, talk about it for 5 minutes, and throw out the challenge for the other to find an album that is in some manner connected, which is in their own collection, and talk about that for 5 minutes. So it's just a way to present a lot of music. I'm joined again by my brother from Plastic Soundwave Cult, Brother Eric. And he left me at the end of the last episode with Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? So Jimi Hendrix is famously a member of the 27 Club, whose premier members of this dubious club are Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison of The Doors, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, and Amy Winehouse. And they are musicians who died tragically young at the age of 27. And I have exactly 0 albums from any of those acts. But I do have another, a less celebrated, but fondly remembered member of the 27 Club is Chris Bell. And Chris Bell was a founding and key member of Big Star. I'm speaking specifically about number 1 record. This is a pressing that's got their first 2 records, number 1 record and Radio City. Number 1 record was released in 1972 on Ardent Records, which is owned by Stax and distributed by Stax Records, as their attempt to break into kind of rock and pop, a little less R&B. And so Big Star is a band of 4 guys formed in Memphis in the early 70s. And the keynote members are Chris Bell and, of course, Alex Chilton. The band only released the 1 record with their original lineup, their first album, before Chris Bell left, and did a little bit of solo work, but died in a car accident just a few years later. And so Big Star as a band is kind of what I call a homework album for me. If you go to the allmusic.com page about them and look at the list of acts that are influenced by Big Star, it's basically a who's who of my collection. Bands like Crowded House and REM and XTC and all the way up to Guster and the Lemon Twigs and stuff. Really, as far as cult bands that never quite made it, that have cast a huge shadow on the recording legacy of bands that did make it, really Big Star may be second only to the Velvet Underground in terms of their stature sort of inside the industry of a band that just never really sold a whole ton of records. I enjoy it, so it's hard for me to listen to it necessarily just as music. It's something I bought out of curiosity because their name would come up a lot. Alex Chilton is name checked in a song by The Replacements. So yeah, I was more following up on, okay, well, maybe I should know more about the artists that influence the artists that I like. And they are often credited with being sort of the progenitors of power pop or jangle pop. And I could see the jangle more so than the power. There's a strong sort of southern boogie sound still in quite a bit of their stuff. Some of it does sound like Renaissance folk, but not really the stuff written by Chris Bell and Alex Chilton. It's nice. I can't say that it's among my favorite records, but it's one that I've had to come to know. At times, it feels like it has more in common with a Lynyrd Skynyrd album to me than with an REM record.
Right on.
And I gave myself a few extra seconds because I was watching you struggle with your cat that entire time.
I'm always struggling with cats. So yesterday, you showed Big Star. That's always an album that I've been curious about getting. I hear a lot of praise about it. I've only heard one song, and that's because you put it on a CD for me.
Yeah, that was Watch the Sunrise, I think.
No, I think it's on Beg, Borrow, and Steal.
Oh, okay.
It might be on one of those other ones too. Yeah. So, and then it was weird because you played that song, and not long after that, that 70s show started, and then that had that song, and then they kind of cheap trickified it at the end there. But I ended up listening to that yesterday on YouTube, and then I listened to it again, and I listened to it a third time, and I thought it was really catchy. So I ended up going and ordering the album. So I was looking at it while I was listening to it and seeing when it was on the Ardent label. I don't have anything on Ardent. And I was looking around, and man, it was tough to find any sort of connection to my collection. But then as I got into doing more research, I found out that Big Star is originally from Memphis, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of music that has come out of Memphis, Tennessee. And probably one that people will never forget, that will always be tied to Memphis, Tennessee, Skillet. This is, I believe, their second album, Comatose. My son actually bought this CD, and I started listening to it, and I thought the songs sound pretty good. Seemed to be about like breakup and, having problems with your girl. And then I found out that it was a religious album, that Skillet is a religious band. And this would be one of those examples of where you create your own thing in your mind about what a song is about. And then you realize it's religion that they're talking about. So when he's like, I left you, I need to come back to you. He ain't talking about his girl, he's talking about Jesus. So that's like one of those things where once you see it, you can't unsee it or hear it or however that is. So once I found that out, it totally changed my perspective on this album. They did have some hits that I used to hear on the radio, and I think one of them was on here. And I still like those songs, but it's like looking at them through a haze now, because I had one vision in my mind of what this guy was talking about, and it turns out that I had the wrong vision. And so I don't listen to it nearly as much. But I do think that the music on it is really good, and the lyrics are good too. because he never says. Again, I'm going to have to listen to this today to know for sure. But when I've listened to it before, I've never heard any mention of Jesus, mention of God. It's always done on a very personal level. Like he, I got to be careful here. Like he knows Jesus on a personal level, not on a metaphysical level, but on like, hey, my buddy Jesus is coming over today. We're talking about records, It almost like that kind of relationship. And I think that's why you tend to think of it as a girl. Of course, that was a big thing that was coming out when this album came out. That
Girls.
was a popular trope, was, breaking up with your girlfriend. I mean, look at all the Limp Bizkit songs that are about breakup. And, you think of that as a really tough band. But the reality of it is they do a lot of things about him being pissed off, being broken up from somebody. And I took this album to be very similar to that. That it was just, talking about the rough side of relationships. But I thought it was romantical and not religical. So, I don't know. It seems like it's been 5 minutes already.
It just ticked over. All right, so you stuck me with Skillet. It's a band I've never heard of, and never heard. A bit of a stumper, but I did come up with maybe kind of a cheat. It just because of the ubiquity of the connection. The album was remixed or mixed in part by Chris Lord Alge, who, along with his brother Tom Lord Alge, they have literally mixed thousands of records. So the pot was pretty wide. So I was looking, I think Tom generally tends to have his fingers on more of the music that I tend to listen to. But Chris Lord Alge has mixed a lot of things, and he got his start in the 80s kind of doing remixes of singles. And so my connection is Madonna's True Blue. He did, and specifically this remaster. You see it on the thing there, remastered. He remixed La Isla Bonita for the 12-inch single, and that version is included down here on the album. So he did not mix the album, but he mixed that single just as he mixed part of the Skillet record. So Madonna's True Blue, surprisingly to me, is Madonna's best-selling album, studio album. The Immaculate Collection, the singles collection, has sold more, but this has sold 25 million copies. So it edges out Like a Virgin, which is what would have been my guess as her best-selling album, or Like a Prayer. But it's True Blue, and it's one of the few that I have from her. I was a singles collection kind of guy from Madonna for years and years, but in the last few years, I've gotten her debut and Ray of Light and True Blue. And it had 5 widely released singles. And I'm kind of split down the middle. Papa Don't Preach and La Isla Bonita are not necessarily my favorites. I don't think there's anything that's straight up awful, but they're not my favorites, especially from Madonna. But Open Your Heart and Live to Tell and True Blue, I think those were all really good singles. And I'm not sure what else there is to say about Madonna or about this album in particular. It does throw me back to a very specific time. And because, funnily, True Blue as a single has been overlooked on all of her greatest hits albums. It was not on the Immaculate Collection, and it was not on Celebration, which was a sort of updated in 2010 or so version of the greatest hits, kind of started from scratch. True Blue was overlooked by both of those. So it's not one that I had until I picked up the album True Blue in the last 2 years or so. But that really takes me back to a time then now when I hear it, because I didn't hear it for so many decades, like three decades, kind of. So it's one of those, and Madonna has a few of those kind of tracks that really take me back. And so I remember the summer being in band camp and finishing up band camp with a trip to the beach for everybody. And I remember hearing it on the radio, somebody's radio out on the beach. And I remember her MTV contest to make a video for the True Blue single. And it was a big hit. Why it's overlooked, I don't know. I love its innocent kind of doo-wop-y feel. Yeah, the other, I can't say that I've listened to the full album so often that I've really internalized the non-singles, but I mean, that's half the album were singles that I do know. And I think it's a solid record. I didn't want to go, I'm an 80s kid. I didn't want to go too solid 80s, but I realized I haven't picked one since my 1981 picks. So heading back to the 80s, certainly could have picked something a little more obscure that Chris Lord-Alge had his fingers on. I do have a couple of albums, but stylistically they seemed closer to the Skillet, and I wanted something that was a big break from that. Because as the decades have gone on, now he's gone on to mixing albums rather than just doing 12-inch mixes, and a lot of stuff in that kind of rock vein. So that is my choice. Madonna's True Blue from that'd be 1986 then, right? I think, yeah.
Yeah, I have that on album. In fact, it's kind of funny now that I think about it. I told you one of the few albums that were left from that for whatever reason I had left home. I said one was Phil Collins' Hello, I Must Be Going, and the other one was Madonna's True Blue. So I do have that on vinyl, an original 1986 copy of it.
Nice. All right. Well,
the Isla La Binta.
You get there eventually. La Isla Bonita.
Yes, I could do much better when I sing along with that song. I actually really like that song. I think Live to Tell is probably my favorite on there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a close second. I do like that song. I like that little Spanish flavor that's going on in it, and I don't know if it's cultural appropriation or not, but she does a good job with it.
Yeah. All right. So that is my selection to throw back to you.
All right. Well, I'm not going to complain listening to True Blue today.
All right. Nice.
All right. So the next album that I chose, it's a little bit easier connection. I was going between a few connections, which your album was True Blue by Madonna. And there's a song on there called Papa Don't Preach. It's about having a baby. I thought, maybe I'd go baby metal. But then it was just like, no, I've already done a song, already. I need to save that trope for later. For more desperate times, I did some connections. And then the guy who designed, and now I can't think of his name, it's something Ayers. He did the art design for True Blue, and he also did the frickin' art design for Police, Synchronicity. But one of the things that I noticed was that in the summer of 1986 is when Madonna's True Blue went number one. And there was another album that was released before hers that was well on its way to number one. But when Madonna released True Blue went straight to number one, and this album ended up at number two in the summer of 1986. He might be thinking, so yeah, Peter Gabriel's album. You think of this as being a super huge hit record, and it is, but it never did make number one. It was knocked out. It was blocked from number one by Madonna's True Blue. Interesting things about this album, even though it's not on the cover right here, it is on the back. This is a first and fifth for Peter Gabriel. This was the fifth album that he had put out as a solo artist. And this is the first album that was not called Peter Gabriel. And apparently what it was is that record executives were getting fed up with him just calling his Peter Gabriel. And so they said, you need to come up with a title. So he just came up with one of the more simpler titles that he could think of. And it was So.
Yeah.
So it's So. I'm a little bit in between on whether Us or So is my favorite album. I've been getting much more into Us, but this has always been my favorite Peter Gabriel album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's your favorite. Peter
Probably.
Gabriel. Probably. And I know it's John Cusack's favorite Peter Gabriel album. Huge hits, Sledgehammer, Red Rain.
Big time.
Big Time. Was In Your Eyes a single off of this, or was it only a single off of?
I think it was a single off of that. I have a 12-inch single of it.
And so this album also has the song "Excellent Birds," which I don't know if he covered. I think he wrote it, and I don't know which one came out first. But Laurie Anderson also has a song called "Excellent Birds," and I believe that she performs on. Is it the same song? I've never actually checked her version, and I have it on tape.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't know her version.
He does perform on her version, and she performs on this version, doing backup. So, and I believe they co-wrote it together. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up for sure. Maybe you could put a little fact in there.
Yeah.
Down there.
Or up there.
So that's my album. I had a few facts on it. I just wanted to make sure that those facts were up to date.
Mm-hmm.
And so, interesting enough, you know what the number one song was for the best-selling song of 1986?
Sledgehammer?
No. That's What Friends Are For by Dionne Warwick and Friends. So,
yeah, the schmaltz always gets it. All right. So moving on from Peter Gabriel's So. I know a lot of facts that are just in my head there, but I was trying to think of a different kind of connection. And rather than use up my 5 minutes on connections I didn't use, I guess, what I went with was the 2-letter album title. Now, Peter Gabriel himself has done it several times now with Us and Up. But it is unusual to have an album title that short. And so I came up with another 2-letter album title, and that is No by They Might Be Giants. And this was from 2002 on Idlewild Recordings. And it was their first explicitly children-focused album. They've done a handful of them since then. Some more explicitly educational. This is just sort of, I think They Might Be Giants is a band that has a kid appeal inherently with things like Particle Man and Birdhouse in Your Soul, songs that kids even today seem to know and rock out to. But this was specifically for kids, and they describe it. I guess they did a follow-up called Why that was not in the educational vein. It was just kind of aimed at kids. And they said, it's not bad for you, but it's not good for you either. It's just kind of silly. So they have a lot of great tunes, and some of them are like total bangers. The Clap Your Hands is basically just a short song about getting you to clap your hands and stomp your feet and jump in the air. Funky banger, great tune, 4 of 2 is a very clever, it would creep my daughter out when she was young, song about a guy who's waiting under the big clock tower for his date to arrive. His 2 o'clock date, and the clock says that it's 4 minutes to 2, without ever acknowledging that the clock is obviously broken, because he stays there until he is in the future with metal cars flying. He's convinced that his date is just minutes away because the clock still reads 4 of 2. So it's got some thematically good songs. Fibber Island is about using your imagination to make things up. So it's got very silly lyrics about how they sew buttons on cars and things on Fibber Island, all the things that they do where you make up that kind of thing. So some of it is vaguely educational. Some of it is just sort of purely silly. There's a song called Violin that really is nothing but saying violin, lin, lin, violin, lin, and picking different words. Mop, I think, is one of them. Mop, 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 mop. It's just really goofy, but it's fun. And so I'm a huge They Might Be Giants fan. I've been a fan since they started, from their very first single, Don't Let's Start, which would play on 120 minutes with regularity. And they're so their own thing. They were alternative when alternative meant not mainstream, and not when alternative meant grungy guitars. This duo of John Flansburgh, John Linnell, followed their own muse from the beginning. They're definitely funny, but they tackle some deep topics through their sort of avant-garde, absurdist pop rock in ways that can really be quite affecting. And they've released a buttload of albums. No is like their 8th, depending on how they're impossible to keep up with, this band. They released technically an album before this on for the E-Music label, which was the first album called Long Tall Weekend that was ever issued solely as a download in 1999. So technically that's a studio album of theirs, but I don't know if people count it, in between rarities and discs and collections and stuff, only available through Bandcamp, or stuff only available through their website, stuff that are collections of their dial-a-songs from that they've operated for 20 years or 30 years now, a phone number that you can get a little song from. They've had so many albums. I've got over almost 500 They Might Be Giants songs in my own library through a whole bunch of albums. But No was the one that fit the criteria of a very short 2-letter album title. So you can work out that specifically, or They Might Be Giants as pertains to them as a whole, up to and including this album. So, all right. I will catch you on the next one.
So you yesterday did They Might Be Giants, and I listened to that album, No, and I thought it was pretty good. There are some, it's a weird dichotomy, because you got some really good funky songs with kind of weird educational, lyrics. And I was fascinated with that it was a child's album. And I was thinking about kids. And at first I was going to go this one direction. So technically I'm going to show two real quick. But one I was looking at a child aspect was this album here. And I think it was more because I wanted to show the most adorable album cover ever. But I backed off on that. So They Might Be Giants, if I understand it correctly, is a duo. So I went with another duo. And they've also were on that album for SpongeBob, but they play all their own instruments. They do have guest musicians. Do you think you know who it is?
Are they named Dean and Gene?
Bingo. Chocolate and Cheese. Album because it was the first one that they did. Sorry, yeah. Because if you do it this way, her boobs will go out of the picture. The reason why I went with this album is because it's got a lot of little Easter eggs in it. And it was the first album that they did where they just didn't use a 4-track, recording session in their own house. They actually went to a studio and worked on this album. And for as silly as their songs can be, kind of like how They Might Be Giants is, there's like a tinge of humor involved. These guys do tackle a little bit more adult themes with that childlike look at it. You know what I'm saying? And so one of the things that is interesting about this album is that this cover is based on a Commodore's cover of all the greatest hits from the Commodores, which has a black boxer male on it with the same not exact, but he has a championship belt on where it says the Commodores on there, and this one says Ween. Chocolate and Cheese is based off of chalk and cheese in England, which I'm not quite sure if I could figure out what that meant, but basically, shit, I guess, crap or not good. And they have a song on here for The Tears of Eddie, which was dedicated to a soul and funk guitarist, and now his name escapes me, but it was Eddie something. And then this whole album is actually dedicated to John Candy, who passed away while they were making this album. And so some of the songs on here that I think are awesome because they don't appear on the outside whatsoever. It's another one of those completely blank. But it starts off with a great song, Take Me Away, and it's almost like a lounge act, where it's take me away to some other place. Yeah. And then it goes into Spinal Meningitis, which is kind of a dark humor. Freedom of 76. That's I think it harkens back to, they're not from Philadelphia, but they are from Pennsylvania. This album came out in 1994. And so the singles that they had on here were I Can't Put My Finger on It, which is, it takes time to get used to listening to that song, but it is, when you first hear it, it's kind of an annoying song. But as it goes along, and if you keep listening to it, it turns out quite beautiful. My personal favorite song ever from Ween is Baby Bitch. It's just a very interesting folk style type song about breakup, but with just a brutal reality behind it. Can You Help My Pony? Actually, they used one time on an episode of Sesame Street the song Buenas Tardes Amigo to help teach kids Spanish. Another great song in here, which comes with some great advice. Don't shit where you eat. And then you got another funny song, the HIV song, which I know that sounds horrible to say is funny, but it's like got this like carnival kind of music, and there's do, 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 AIDS, do, 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 you know, and then I believe that's kind of the only Joppa Road is a really pretty song. Again, A Tear for Eddie is another beautiful, beautiful song. And I just love how they wrap up beauty and silliness together, and just such a nice looking package, if I can say that tongue in cheek. Yeah, so my pick was Ween, Chocolate and Cheese.
Well, I have an immediate, off the top of my head, idea to work off that from, and that will have to kick off episode 3 or compilation 3 of Music Collection Connection here on Tremendous Views.